Have you ever wondered how large automation projects run the same Playwright test against dev, QA, and pre-prod environments without modifying a single line of test code? Or maybe you have been changing the application URL manually before every execution and thought, there has to be a better way. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to configure multiple environments in Playwright TypeScript using two common approaches that are used in real-world automation frameworks. By the end of this video, you will be able to execute the same test suites against multiple environments by simply changing the project or environment configuration. Let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, I create content around Playwright, Selenium, API testing, AI-powered test automation, and modern QA practices. Today we are going to solve a very common problem in automation testing. Suppose your application is deployed in multiple environments like dev, QA, and pre-prod, and each environment has a different URL and possibly different user credentials. Should you create three different test suites? Absolutely not. A properly designed Playwright framework should allow you to write the test once and execute it against any environment. In this video, we'll cover why multi-environment testing is important and how to perform it. We'll also cover two approaches that are widely used in real projects, using Playwright projects with environment-specific configuration files, using environment variables with .env files and .env package. We'll also check how baseURL works and discuss around the best practices that could be used for specifically multi-environment setup and execution. I'll also explain when to use each approach and which one I recommend for real-time frameworks. Why multi-environment testing? Imagine your application follows this deployment pipeline. The code is first deployed to dev. After performing all of the tests on the dev environment, it is deployed to the QA environment, which then finally moves to pre-prod environment after all the regression tests are run. And finally, the code is deployed to the production environment. Now imagine your test looks like this. Await page.go to https dev.company.com/login. What happens when the team asks you to run the same test on pre-prod or the QA environment? You have to edit the URL again and again for different environments. This quickly becomes difficult to maintain. Instead, we should configure the environment once and let Playwright handle the rest. Let's look at the project that we will be using in this demo. I have created one env folder which has files related to the different environments, pre-prod and qa.env. I'll talk about this env loader in the upcoming videos. But for this video, we have this env file folder. Let's understand the purpose of these env files. So I have two files here, preprod.env.ts and qa.env.ts. The qa.env.ts is the specific configuration for the QA environment, and preprod holds the configuration for the pre-prod environment. You can note here the base URL for QA is http localhost:7002. Username and password are also given here. Similarly, for the pre-prod environment, the base URL is localhost 7003. The port is different. In QA, it's 7002. In pre-prod, it's 7003. Let me show you the test as well. The test is pretty simple. There are two tests here. One that just goes to the URL and performs a verification for verifying the title. And I'm printing the pre-prod username and the password using the console.log statement. I'll show you this in the later stage when we will be talking about the environment variable part. Similarly, in the next test, check header, you'll notice here the page.goto has just a slash here. So this particular URL will be resolved based on the env specific URL that we have given, the base URL that we have given in the env file. You can notice that I'm not using the complete application URL anywhere in the test. That's because Playwright will automatically resolve the URL using the configured base URL from the env file. Now let's check out for the first approach using Playwright projects. So let's go to the playwright config.ts file. In this file, there is a project array. I have defined two projects here. The first project for the QA environment and the second project for the pre-prod environment. The QA environment has different configurations where it will use the desktop Chrome for executing the test. The base URL has been set from the env file. You can see the base URL has been set to qa.baseURL. Here I have imported the QA env file on the top of playwright.config.ts. Similarly, for pre-prod also, I have imported the same file here. And this object, I'll be using QA object to reach out to each field, call each field, qa.baseURL. Similarly, if I want to call the metadata from the respective environment specific file that I have created for the environment configuration, I can call it using this way. Metadata username, qa.username, password, qa.password. It's just for explanation purpose that I have shown the username and password here by taking it from the env configuration file, but it is not a good practice to expose the sensitive things like username and password or token, secret keys, etc. into the environment specific configuration files. It's better to use environment variable and call it on runtime. I'll show you in the later stage when we will be talking about environment variables using .env package. So you can see I have also defined another project object pre-prod where the base URL has been picked from the pre-prod env configuration file. Similarly, it will run the test on the Firefox browser. This use defines the devices. Desktop Firefox means it will run the test on Firefox. For the QA, it will run the test on desktop. This is just for explanation purpose. As an example, you can define the desktop Chrome also here. But just to give you a different view, I have defined desktop Chrome and desktop Firefox. Every project here in playwright.config.ts in this array for the QA as well as in this array for the pre-prod can have its own browser, viewport, permissions, locale, authentication, retries, timeout, and base URL properties. Accordingly, you can set all of these configurations here respect to the particular project. That's why Playwright projects are much more than browser configurations. Just to reiterate the same thing again, you can see the base URL will be picked here for the QA environment from qa.env.ts. For the pre-prod, it will pick up the base URL from localhost 7003 from this preprod.env.ts. And we have imported both of these files at the top on playwright.config.ts. And similarly, in the projects, we have used it here, QA, and here we have used it pre-prod. Now, how do I run the test? And just to show you the test as well, you can see there are two tests here. I'm not importing anything here. I'm just giving a plain page.go/, and here also page.go/. But according to the env specification, it will automatically run the test on the specified base URL. Before we run the test, we need to start the application, demo application that we will be using for this test. So currently I'm using this to do MVC from GitHub. It's a very good application and we can clone it from here. It has also provided us with the commands that could be used to run this application. We need to move to this folder, examples react, and then npm install, npm run build, and then npm serve. So I have already cloned this application on my local, and let me move to the respective repository to do MVC examples react, and then npm run serve. It will start the application by default on 7002 server, but since I have to show the pre-prod environment as well, I will have to build so by default this application gets started on 7002 port. I have made some changes to this package.json of this project, and I've added one more script to run the application on 7003 port as well. So ideally, when the test runs on pre-prod, it will navigate to the 7003. So ideally it should work fine. And we'll see how the things work with multiple environment setup. So I have started both of these instances. The first instance is running on 7002 localhost, and the other one is running on 7003 localhost. For 7002, I have defined the QA environment project. For 7003, I have defined the pre-prod environment. So let me go to the project, Playwright project again, and run the command npx playwright test. And you see there are multiple tests here. So ideally, I'll not run the default command npx playwright test hyphen project equal to QA, but I will provide the respective test name that I want to execute, just to make sure that the test that I want to run, only that specific test runs. So it will be test slash multi-env example.spec.ts and hyphen project equal to QA. And let me execute this. And you can see the test got executed successfully, and the URL comes printed as localhost 7002. Let me quickly show you the test as again. And you can see I have printed the page.url in the console log for both of these tests. And ideally, we can see the same printed here. In our qa.env, we had the base URL pointing to localhost 7002. We can also check the report for more details. And we can see the localhost 7002 coming up here. Similarly, for the other test, as title, check header, we can see the localhost 7002. That is picked from the env configuration file. Now let me run the same test on the pre-prod. One thing to note here is I have not changed a single line of code in the test. What I'm doing is I'm just changing the project here while executing the command to run the test. So this test should run on localhost 7003, and we see that the same URL 7003 has been printed here, which means the base URL now is pointing to the pre-prod environment, the environment that we gave in the command hyphen project. Now let me tell you how this base URL resolves. So you'll see in the test, we have just given page.goto and then a slash for both of the tests, check header as well as has title. How does this particular test know where to go? The answer is simple. Playwright combines the base URL with the relative URL. So the base URL, which is there in the env file for QA, this base URL is picked for the respective project. And ideally, in the test, this slash resolves to localhost 7002 when we give the project QA. Similarly, for project pre-prod, this particular slash resolves to localhost 7003. So ideally, when we run the test using QA project, the base URL resolved is 7000 localhost 7002. But when we switch it to pre-prod, the base URL, which is coming from the playwright.config.ts, gets resolved to pre-prod environment configuration, which is set to localhost 7003. So without changing any code, this is the one of the biggest advantage of using base URL. Now coming to the next part, the next approach, using environment variables. So instead of storing the configuration inside the TypeScript file like we did for creating this pre-prod env and then QA env, we can create a .env file like this, where we can set the QA URL, pre-prod URL, pre-prod username, password, API token, client secrets, and so on. Whatever we want, we can store it in the .env file. But it is important to note here that Playwright does not automatically load .env files. We need this package .env. So to install this package, we'll have to go to the terminal and then run this command npm install -d.env. Once the installation is complete, we can go to the respective file where we want to import this .env package for using the environment variable. So for example, if I want to use it in the playwright config.ts, I need to import it like this: import star as .env from .env, and then give this line of code .env.config. Once this is done, we can easily access the variables from the .env file in this way. So I have created another project here just to showcase the env variable part. This will be using the base URL from the .env file that we created. So you can see the pre-prod URL is set to localhost 7003 inside the pre-prod URL inside .env file, and the same has been called here using process.env.preprod URL. Similarly, for the metadata, if I want to call the username and the password also, it has been stored. You can see the preprod username and preprod password has been stored in this .env file, which has been called using this process.env.preprod username and preprod password. Now let's move to the test again. You can note here, I have called this console.log process.env.preprod username and preprod password, right? But you can note here, I have not imported the .env package or the .env.config here. That is because using projects, if I am running this particular test, then this is already resolved using playwright config.ts, because this is the first file that gets executed when the test is run using playwright. So ideally in the test, I do not have to call this import statement for .env package. Now let me quickly run this and show you how we can use this environment variable for the test. Since I have already defined it using the project, I can just simply call env variable, the name of the project. And you can see the preprod environment variable was resolved using .env file. And inside that, the preprod URL was localhost 7003. The same URL was navigated to by the in the test. And you can see preprod user 001 and password 123. Both of these values are coming from this .env file. And you can see the console.log statements here, which is calling from process.env. The respective variable that we want to call. Now the question comes, which approach should you use? This is probably the most common question. Should I use projects or .env files? The answer is it depends. If you are running dev, QA, pre-prod using -- project in the command, then Playwright projects are the better solution. If your CI pipeline selects only one environment, so for example, you are using a test_env variable inside the .env file, then you can update that particular variable using the .env file, and then using .env in the config, you can call that respective environment variable and make the test run. It all depends like how you want to run. So basically the ideal way is to use -- project and then respectively have this multiple setup. If I want to run the test across multiple environment setup all at once, like for example, in the playwright.config, we have these 3 different projects: QA, preprod, and env variable. So for example, you have 3 different projects like dev, QA, and preprod. So if I want to run the test across all of this environment setup in the same time parallelly, so what you can do is you can run this command npx playwright test. But here, since I have other tests also in the defined in the project, which are expecting some other base URL and variables, and there are some other tests as well. So I am not calling the global command npx playwright test. I'm using this test/multi-env specific test that I want to run. One more thing, there are other projects also that I have defined in this playwright config, like Chrome, Setup, and Chromium. I'll comment this. So let me execute the test and see how it performs. And we can see 6 test parts. How does this value come to 6? Ideally, there are 2 tests: test has title, test check header. There are 2 tests, but in playwright config.ts, there is 1 project, 2, and 3. So there are 3 projects and 2 tests. That means each test runs on So each project runs two tests. So the QA runs two, preprod runs two, and env variable runs two. The total comes to 6. And that is the reason why you are seeing so many times these values have been output based upon the number of times the test was run. So this is how easily we can use the uh, multi-environment setup and run the test. Talking about the real world best practices, some recommendations from my side would be for the real world automation. You never hard code the base URL. Ideally, call it from the env variable file that we defined like this, or you define it in the .env file, but never hard code your URL in the test, because that will cause problem as the project size increases. Never commit your passwords, store them into .env file. Once you create a .env file, make sure you add that .env to the git ignore file. So this .env file never gets pushed to the remote repository. You can also use your continuous integration secret managers. Like for example, in GitHub Actions, in GitHub, you have the secret variable management. Different options are there. We can save the environment variables and the secret variables there. Or if you're using any cloud platform, use that specific platform's secret manager to store your secret variables. Always keep your environment configuration separate from the test logic. Like we did here, the environment configurations are separate in a separate folder, and in the multi environment we do not have the setup, we have just the test. So the test logic remains separate from the environment variables, and we can write, so using this we can write the test once and run it in any environment that we want. So we can use Playwright projects that is available in the playwright.config.ts to set up the browsers and environments. And finally, we can keep the test scripts completely independent of the environment. So the test only tests the respective behavior of the application. It does not need to have the configuration and all of the stuffs. Your configurations will always be separated from the respective test. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more Playwright, Selenium, AI agents, and test automation tutorials. If you have any questions, let me know it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.